I thought I was saving a patient. I didn't realize I was becoming his most guarded possession. My career was over until he decided to buy the whole hospital just to save me. When I arrived for my morning shift, the familiar, chaotic energy of the surgical wing had been replaced by a heavy, watchful silence. Two men in charcoal suits stood like stone pillars outside the break room, their earpieces glinting under the fluorescent lights. They didn't look at me, but I felt their focus shift as I passed, a physical weight pressing against my back. "Olivia, a word," Dr. Aris said, intercepting me before I could reach the nurse's station. He looked pale, his usual confidence replaced by a twitchy, forced smile. "We've had a significant private donation, a benefactor who insists on absolute discretion and the best possible care for our high-profile recovery in Suite 901. 901? I blinked. That's the VIP penthouse. We don't even have the staffing for— "You've been reassigned," he cut in, handing me a new security badge. It was gold-flecked, a stark contrast to my standard blue plastic. Full-time, no other patients, no rotations, just him. It was a specific condition of the grant. The grant was Marco. I knew it before I even stepped into the elevator. He wasn't just recovering, he was colonizing. When the doors opened on the 9th floor, the smell of antiseptic was buried under the scent of expensive tobacco and lilies. The entire floor had been cleared of other patients. It was a ghost ward, haunted by men in dark suits who stepped aside for me with a terrifying, synchronized deference. I pushed open the heavy oak doors to his suite. Marco was no longer hooked to the monitors. He was sitting up in a velvet armchair that certainly didn't belong to the hospital yesterday, a silk robe draped over his broad, tattooed shoulders. He was reading a file, but he closed it the moment I entered, his gaze locking onto mine with the same predatory heat that had burned through my dreams. "You look tired, Olivia," his voice a low vibration that seemed to hum in the very floorboards. "The commute from that cramped apartment is too long. I've had my people look into closer arrangements." "You can't do this, Marco," I said, my voice rising as I marched toward him. "You can't buy a hospital. You can't buy my career." "I didn't buy the hospital. I simply ensured its excellence," he replied, standing up with a fluid, lethal grace that defied his recent trauma. He moved into my personal space, the sheer heat of his body making my breath hitch. He reached out, his fingers trailing lightly over the new badge pinned on my chest. "As for your career, I am merely protecting my investment. My blood is in your veins, and yours is in mine. Why would I let you waste your light on people who don't understand your worth?" He leaned in, his lips hovering just inches from my ear. "In this wing, you are the only authority, except for me. Here, you aren't a servant to a system of rules. You are a queen in a kingdom I built just to keep you close." The terrifying part wasn't his arrogance. It was the way my heart hammered against my ribs, not in fear, but in a sudden, traitorous thrill. The sanctuary of the 9th floor was shattered 3 days later by the sound of a voice that didn't belong to Marco's world. Head Nurse Miller, a woman who had spent 30 years wielding hospital policy like a jagged blade, marched into the VIP suite. She didn't look at the suited guards. She looked at me, her eyes narrow and full of professional disdain. "I've reviewed the logs, Olivia," she snapped, tossing a printed report on the mahogany side table. "The night of the shooting, there's a discrepancy in the blood units. No requisition form, no signature, and yet the patient survived a massive hemorrhage. You want to tell me how that happened before I hand this to the board and the police?" My stomach dropped into a cold abyss. The protocol I had so carefully lived by was finally catching up to me. I looked at Miller, then at Marco, who remained seated, calmly sipping an espresso as if we were discussing the weather. "It was an emergency, Mrs. Miller," I began, my voice small. "The supply was delayed and "You played God," she finished, her voice rising. "You broke federal law, and you're going to lose your license for it. I've already drafted the incident report. You're finished here." I felt the walls of the life I had built beginning to crumble. Everything I had worked for, my stability, my identity, was about to be erased by a single sheet of paper. I looked at Marco, expecting a sneer or a dismissive comment. Instead, I saw a terrifying stillness. He didn't move, but the air in the room seemed to sharpen. "Mrs. Miller," Marco said softly. He didn't raise his voice, yet the head nurse froze. He stood up, the silk of his robe whispering against the floor. He stepped into the light. He looked like a wolf in a tailored cage. "You are a woman who values order. I respect that. But you are also a woman who is remarkably close to retirement. It would be a tragedy if your pension was liquidated due to unforeseen administrative errors in your own past." "Are you threatening me?" Miller gasped, though the bravado was leaking out of her. "I am offering you a peaceful exit," Marco replied, stepping into the light. He looked like a wolf in a tailored cage. "Olivia saved my life. In my world, that makes her sacred. To touch her career is to touch me. Go home, Mrs. Miller. Tell the board you've decided to retire early. My lawyers will ensure the paperwork is generous." Miller looked at me, then at the shadow of the men standing at the door, and finally back at Marco. She didn't say another word. She turned and fled, the report forgotten on the table. I stared at the door long after she was gone, the silence of the room ringing in my ears. Marco walked over and picked up the report, tearing it slowly into tiny white flakes. "She's gone, Olivia. The threat is handled," he said, reaching out to tilt my chin up so I had to face him.